When we arrived at the rig, it was eerily silent, no crew. No sound, just the creaking of metal. The ocean was calm, too calm, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. A thin layer of fog wrapped around the base of the rig, shrouding everything in a grey haze. As our transport boat backed away, I felt a strange weight in my chest, like we had just stepped into a place forgotten by the world. We were told the crew had gone silent 2 days ago. No communications, no signals, just dead. Our task was simple: get on board, assess the situation, and report back. But the silence was not the kind that suggested a faulty radio. It was heavy, unnatural, as though the rig had been swallowed by something invisible. The deck was littered with loose papers, tools left in the middle of use, even a coffee cup still half full, as if someone had just been there seconds ago. It looked like the crew had vanished mid-task, without panic, without warning. The eerie thing was how everything remained in place. No signs of a struggle, no overturned chairs or broken equipment. It was as if the people operating the rig had just blinked out of existence. We split into teams, each one assigned a different section of the structure. I took the central control hub with Reynolds. He was a quiet guy, the type who didn't scare easily. But even he kept glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. Inside the control room, monitors were flickering with static. Some displayed error messages in bright red fonts, warning of system failure, overpressure, and loss of main power. Others showed looping footage of empty hallways. One screen caught my attention: camera 17. It pointed down the main hallway leading to the crew quarters. The feed was static heavy, but something about it felt off. I couldn't see anything specific, just shadows, long and slow-moving shadows that didn't match any natural shape I recognized. Before I could focus, the feed cut out. We started checking crew logs. The last entry was made 36 hours ago by someone named Ellis, the rig supervisor. It was brief, clearly rushed. Containment failed. No way to shut it. Everyone evacuating. That was it. No further context, no explanation, no mention of what it was. Containment. What the hell had they been drilling into? Reynolds tried to boost the backup generator, but the switches were unresponsive, like the system was refusing to restart. He muttered something under his breath about sabotage. We moved into the maintenance hallways, where the air was heavier. I noticed it felt warmer, too unnaturally warm for being surrounded by the open sea. The silence deepened the further we walked. No dripping pipes, no mechanical hums, just our own footsteps. Even our radios, which should have been buzzing with chatter from the other teams, remained eerily silent, static at best. I tried calling out to the others, but got no reply. That's when we began hearing faint thuds coming from the floor below us. Rhythmic, spaced apart, almost like footsteps. But these weren't ordinary. They sounded heavy, echoing with a kind of weight that suggested size something big and slow and aware of its surroundings. Reynolds froze mid-step. "You hear that?" he whispered, and I nodded, raising my flashlight toward the stairwell that led down, but no one came up, and no light filtered from below. Just darkness and that faint rhythmic thumping. The stairwell felt like a mouth, and I didn't want to walk into it. Instead, we backed away and marked the location on our map. We decided to regroup with the others. Back in the main hallway, we passed the crew lounge. I peered through the glass and saw a game of cards laid out on the table, half-finished hands, open cans of soda, and a tablet with music frozen mid-song. Everything looked paused. Reynolds stepped in to investigate while I stayed at the door. That's when I noticed something on the window outside. A smear, long and thick, as if something had been pressed against it from the outside. The strange part, the rig platform was nearly 200 feet above sea level. Whatever made that mark hadn't flown, it had climbed. As night began to fall, we finally made contact with one of the other teams. Barely a voice crackled through the radio, drenched in static. Something's moving in the water. Not fish, not human. It's watching. That was all before the signal cut. We couldn't reconnect. The silence returned, heavier this time. The kind that hums in your ears, as if something large and hidden is breathing just out of sight. That first night, neither Reynolds nor I could sleep. Every metallic groan of the rig made us flinch. We took turns keeping watch, our flashlights trained on the door. I thought I saw something move across the deck, just beyond the lights reached hall, slow, sliding instead of walking. But when I ran outside, nothing was there. Just cold wind and that damned silence. By morning, 2 more of our team were unaccounted for. No blood, no signs of forced entry. Just their gear left behind, neatly arranged as if someone or something had set it down in their place. We were starting to understand this wasn't a simple rescue mission. It was something else entirely. The rig's lower levels were dark, cold, and coated in a thin layer of oil-slick grime that made every step feel unstable. As we descended, the lights overhead flickered, and the hum of machinery faded into an eerie, almost suffocating quiet. We had expected broken equipment, or maybe signs of panicked doors flung open, scattered belongings, maybe even messages scrawled in desperation. But what we found was stranger. Everything was intact, too intact. The environment was still running on emergency power, which meant some systems were functional, but no one was using them. It was like a ghost crew had kept the rig operational, following routines without human hands. The hallway leading to the drilling chamber was particularly narrow, lit only by low emergency lights that cast deep shadows across the walls. A low, rhythmic creaking echoed through the corridor, not from the structure shifting, but something else. I kept noticing things out of the corner of my eye shapes, distortions, like heat waves in the air, but when I turned, nothing was there. At first, I thought my vision was just adjusting, but Reynolds admitted he was seeing them too. Whatever they were always just outside our direct sight, as though they didn't want to be fully seen. We entered one of the lower control rooms, where more data logs were stored. A large console was still powered, showing a rotating 3D schematic of the drill shaft. It was deeper than any of us had been told. Much deeper. The animation showed a red zone marked Restricted Level 9. I tried to access the logs connected to that section, but the files were encrypted, labeled with strange project names like Echo Root and Vessel 22. These weren't oil drilling designations. They sounded like something you'd see in a lab, not an industrial rig. Reynolds managed to open a video file from the security logs. The footage was jittery and in low resolution, but what it captured chilled us. It showed the crew gathered near the drill shaft, standing still, all facing the same direction. They weren't moving, they weren't talking, they were just staring. Then, without warning, one by one, they began stepping forward into the shaft, not falling, stepping, walking into what should have been an empty abyss, hundreds of meters deep. No one screamed. No one resisted. It was like they were being called. We looked at each other in disbelief. There was no explanation. Were they hypnotized, controlled, something else? Either way, they were gone. That explained why there were no bodies, no signs of a struggle. They had willingly walked away from their lives, their survival instincts, completely overridden by whatever had touched their minds. We decided to check the drill floor ourselves, despite every part of me screaming not to. It was like we were being pulled toward it now, not by logic, but a kind of compulsion that I couldn't shake. The drill floor was massive, a giant circular space filled with scaffolding and suspended equipment. The main shaft was in the center, its cover pried open. Around the rim, there were deep gouges in the steel marks that looked like claw scrapes, as if something enormous had tried to climb out. That made no sense. The shaft was supposed to be narrow and reinforced. What could have come up from there? We peered down into the hole. Only darkness stared back, thick and endless. No sound, not even an echo. I dropped a small bolt into the shaft. It never hit the bottom. We found a strange set of symbols carved into the wall near the drill controls, circles within circles. Spiral patterns that hurt my eyes if I stared at them too long. They were drawn in oil, but the smell wasn't right. It wasn't industrial. It was organic, almost rotting. And yet it hadn't dried. The markings shimmered faintly in the low light, like they were alive. I touched one out of curiosity. A jolt shot through my hand, like static electricity but stronger, and I pulled back in shock. My fingers were numb for hours. Reynolds started, acting strange after that. He became quieter, more distracted. He stopped responding to my radio checks. I caught him staring at the shaft multiple times, even inching closer to it, like the crew in the video. When I confronted him, he just blinked at me like he didn't understand what I was saying. I had to physically pull him away once, and afterward, he claimed he didn't remember going near it at all. I began to wonder if something was affecting our minds too, just slower, more subtly. Maybe the crew didn't disappear all at once. Maybe it took days. I sealed off the shaft entrance with chains and a heavy steel grate. It wouldn't stop something powerful, but it made me feel better. Then I returned to the control room to check the communication systems again. This time, one of the screens had changed. It displayed a message. The door is open. There was no source. No program had been running that could display it. I tried shutting the system down, but the message remained, burning on the screen in bright, blood-red letters. The temperature on the lower levels began to rise suddenly. We could hear metal groaning, like pressure was building from beneath the rig. Something was moving down there. Not machinery, something alive. And then the lights went out. Total darkness. Just the sound of our breathing and the faint hum of whatever was crawling toward the surface. We located the captain's quarters after a long search through the upper level of the rig. The hallway was silent, with each door sealed tightly shut, except one, the captain's room, which was slightly ajar as if someone had left in a hurry, or never bothered to close it. Inside, the room was surprisingly neat compared to the chaos we'd found elsewhere. A mug of cold coffee still sat on the desk, and the bed was untouched. It felt as though the captain had vanished in the middle of a thought. On the far wall, above the desk, were pinned several maps, satellite images, and notes scribbled in red marker. Each one had lines drawn from the rig to various locations in the ocean, most of which didn't match any commercial maps we had. We examined his logs, which were scattered across the desk in a series of leather-bound notebooks. The entries started off routine, updates about equipment, shift changes, minor mechanical issues, But about 2 weeks before the disappearance, the tone began to shift. He stopped using technical jargon and started describing dreams. Dreams that weren't his own. He wrote that at night he could feel something breathing beneath the ocean floor, and that he had begun to hear whispers whenever he walked by the main drill. He thought it was exhaustion or isolation getting to him, but then others started reporting the same thing. Not just his crew, even the engineers and techs were whispering about voices, about someone or something calling them from the deep. One passage stood out. The captain had written, "The drill broke through something. Not rock, not oil. A membrane." That word chilled me. He repeated it several times. Membrane? He claimed what lay beneath wasn't natural. It wasn't oil or gas. It was something ancient and dormant. He believed the crew had woken it up. The rig wasn't just over a deposit, it was above. A sealed chamber. And when the drill reached it, everything changed. He wrote about how some crew members began to lose time, vanishing for hours with no memory of where they had been. Others became violent, irrational. One man had apparently jumped into the ocean during a supply run, whispering that he needed to be closer to the song. Behind one of the closet panels, we found a small metal case locked with a biometric seal. One of our techs managed to bypass it. Inside were voice recorders labeled by date. We listened to the most recent one first. It began with the captain breathing heavily. He sounded terrified. His voice trembled as he described hearing a constant low hum, like a deep note being played inside his skull. He said it never stopped, even when he was asleep. The sound came from beneath the rig, and it was growing louder every day. He claimed it had a rhythm, like a heartbeat, and that the crew could feel it underfoot at night. He talked about a change in the crew's eyes, how some of them began to avoid bright lights, preferring to stay below deck, near the base of the drill. They'd stare into the shaft for hours, silent, motionless. He caught one of them trying to climb down the rig cable. Another was found writing in an unknown language on the walls of the mechanical bay, using what appeared to be their own blood. The captain said he tried to radio for help, but the signals were always jammed or redirected, as if the rig itself was preventing contact. He believed the thing beneath the ocean had control now, not just of the drill, but of the minds on board. One final entry was recorded just a few hours before the crew vanished. It was short. The captain said only, "It's awake now. I can hear it thinking. It knows I'm not ready." Then there was a long silence, broken only by what sounded like wet footsteps in the background. Not boots, bare feet, slowly walking across metal. Then the recording ended. We checked the cabin floor and noticed scratches near the bed, as if something had been dragged. A closer look revealed dried blood along the underside of the mattress, not visible unless you lifted the frame. We never found the captain's body, but the trail led to a ventilation shaft that ran downward, toward the lower levels. Too narrow for someone to escape through, but just wide enough for someone or something to be pulled into. The cabin lights began to flicker again, and a strange smell filled the air, like seawater mixed with rotting vegetation. It wasn't the normal scent of oil or rust. It was earthy, old, as if something had seeped up from deep below the sea and found its way into the vents. We didn't speak. We just looked at each other, suddenly aware that the room felt heavier, quieter, as if we were no longer alone. As we left the captain's quarters, I felt the door resist for a moment, like someone was pulling it from the other side, but there was no one there. Just the silence, the growing pressure in the air, and the feeling that the rig itself was watching us now, learning from us, or waiting. When we finally reached the main drill shaft, the very heart of the oil rig's operation, we were struck by how unnaturally silent it had become. The area was supposed to be the loudest part of the structure, the constant mechanical hum, the grinding of gears, the deep rumble of the drill itself tearing through seabed layers, but there was nothing. Just silence, broken only by the faint clinking of tools swaying gently on their hooks and the occasional creak of the rig shifting above the water. It felt like the entire machine had stopped breathing. The lights were dimmer here too, flickering sporadically as if something was draining the power. But the strangest thing wasn't the silence or the darkness. It was the temperature. It was freezing. Our breath misted in the air, despite the enclosed space. And the walls of the shaft room felt damp and cold, as though the ocean was seeping through from the other side. There were signs of panic scattered around the control room adjacent to the drill. Chairs had been overturned, monitors cracked, and several panels had been hastily shut off or pried open. Yet there was no blood, no signs of struggle, just an overwhelming sense of abandonment. Whatever had happened here hadn't been violent in the traditional sense. It had been psychological, creeping, invasive. The kind of fear that drives people to flee rather than fight. A small journal lay on the ground beside one of the operator's stations. Its pages were soaked with seawater, but some of the writing was still legible. The last few entries detailed a growing unease among the staff. One technician had claimed to see shadows crawling along the walls, even when there was no light source to cast them. Another said he felt like he was being followed every time he passed by the drill shaft. Though he could never catch who or what it was, the most disturbing note described a voice not heard through the ears, but inside the mind, a constant whispering in a language none of them understood, yet they instinctively knew it wasn't human. Several crew members began to obsessively draw circular patterns on every surface they could find: desks, walls, equipment, even their own skin. These circles always surrounded a single point, a dark dot in the center, as if they were trying to map or contain something. One crew member reportedly stood at the edge of the shaft for 12 hours straight, unmoving, eyes fixed downward. When another tried to pull him away, he screamed violently, claiming it would see them all if he looked away. After that incident, access to the shaft was restricted. But that restriction came too late. As we peered over the edge of the drill shaft, a sense of vertigo hit us. It wasn't just the depth, though the shaft stretched down farther than we could see, vanishing into darkness. It was something deeper, more primal, like looking into a living eye. The walls of the shaft were slick, not with oil, but with something else. A thin, glistening membrane coated the steel like a second skin, pulsing almost imperceptibly. One of our team dropped a glow stick down the hole. We waited and waited. No sound, no splash, nothing. It was like the shaft didn't lead into the ocean floor anymore, but into a void, a place beyond the physical. Something had changed, not just in the crew, but in the structure of reality around this place. Then we heard it, a low vibration, too deep to be a mechanical hum. It wasn't coming from the equipment. It came from within the shaft itself, a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat buried deep within the earth. As we stood frozen, the pulse quickened slightly, as if reacting to our presence. Lights in the room began to flicker more aggressively, and the temperature dropped even further. One of our motion sensors beeped. Something was moving below. The sensor registered a large mass, slowly ascending. Not fast, but steadily. We couldn't see it, but the data was clear. Something was coming up. We pulled back from the shaft, panic rising, but none of us could bring ourselves to leave. It was like being tethered by a force we didn't understand. Then a low groan filled the chamber, not from the rig, from beneath. The metal floor vibrated gently beneath our boots, and for the first time, we heard a sound that would haunt us forever. Laughter, but not human laughter. It echoed in our skulls like a chorus of voices layered atop each other, some high, some guttural, none natural. It wasn't amused laughter, it was triumphant, as if something had been waiting for us to come and see what we had awakened. The final horror was the realization that the drill had never stopped. The machinery above was silent, yes, but deeper down, something was still turning. We hadn't broken into a natural oil pocket. We'd pierced a veil, an ancient barrier that had kept something imprisoned for countless centuries. And now, it was aware. We couldn't see it yet, but we could feel it watching, reaching, preparing. The rig wasn't an oil station anymore. It was a doorway. After the events surrounding the drill shaft, we decided to make our way to the crew's living quarters, hoping to find any remaining signs of life or at least clues about where the team had gone. The halls on this part of the rig were eerily different. It wasn't just the emptiness. It was the way the air felt wrong, too heavy and still like walking through a vacuum. The silence here had a pressure to it, as if even sound was being swallowed by something unseen. Our boots echoed on the metallic floors, but the sound never carried far, vanishing almost instantly into the shadows. We passed door after door, most of them slightly ajar, as though people had left in a hurry but never bothered to close them behind. The walls were marked with handprints, not bloody, just grimy and frantic, trailing along like someone had been feeling their way. In the dark, some of them were child-sized, though there had never been children on this rig. In the common area, we found personal belongings scattered everywhere. Mugs still had coffee stains, chairs were pushed out from tables, and a deck of cards lay mid-game, as if people had vanished mid-sentence. But what chilled us to the bone was the sound of the television it was on, even though no one had power running to that section. The screen flickered static, but every now and then, it flashed an image, frames so brief and distorted, we could barely register them. Faces, twisted, pale, and screaming. Not for help, but in warning. Like they had seen something they could never unsee. We tried to turn it off, but the button did nothing. Even unplugged, the screen continued to flicker. Eventually, we had to leave it behind. As we moved deeper into the crew's sleeping quarters, things got stranger. Every room was empty, but each held a sense of disarray, as if their occupants had either left in panic or had been pulled away. Mid-dream, bedsheets were twisted, belongings left mid-use. One room had the shower running ice-cold water, yet the metal was bone dry, as if the water had never touched the walls. Another had all the mirrors covered with bedsheets and towels. In one of the bunks, we found crude drawings taped to the walls. They were sketched in charcoal and oil, disturbing images of a vast figure beneath the sea, all tentacles and jagged limbs, eyes that seemed to follow you no matter where you stood. Most of the drawings were of this being, but a few showed something more terrifying. The crew, standing around the drill shaft, eyes hollow, mouths open unnaturally wide. A mass of dark tendrils stretched from the hole and connected to each of them, as if they were feeding it or becoming part of it. We opened the locker of one of the missing engineers. Inside, we found a journal that hadn't yet been soaked or ruined. His final entries were disjointed, erratic. He wrote of dreams that didn't feel like dreams, Visions of being submerged in an ocean that wasn't made of water, but of pure darkness. A void so deep it pressed into the skin like ice. He wrote of a voice that whispered not just into his ears, but into his blood, a command to return to the source. It seemed some of the crew had begun sleepwalking, wandering back to the drill site every night and waking with no memory of doing so. Some had started speaking in languages no one could recognize. One man reportedly tore out his own eyes because he claimed he could still see what's underneath. As we were leaving that section of the rig, the door to the hallway behind us slammed shut on its own. We rushed back, thinking it was the wind or a pressure shift, but the air was still, completely still. Then came the sound. Not footsteps, not mechanical worry, but breathing, heavy, slow, wet breathing. From somewhere just around the corner, we stood in complete silence, weapons drawn, flashlights shaking. One of our crew called out, thinking maybe it was a survivor. No answer, just more breathing. But it wasn't coming from just one place. It was echoing from multiple rooms now, all around us, like something circling slowly, unseen but palpably present. In one of the quarters, a closet door was open, just enough for us to see inside. A shadow stood behind the coats, unmoving. At first we thought it was just our imagination, but then it blinked. Two tiny, glimmering lights where eyes should be. It didn't move, it didn't run. It just stood there, watching. One of us stepped forward, and the closet door slammed shut violently. When we opened it seconds later, it was empty. But on the inside wall, freshly scrawled in black, were the words, "Too late." We ran, not out of fear of being attacked, but because we realized something horrifying. Whatever happened to the crew wasn't an accident, and it wasn't isolated to one location on the rig. It was spreading, not like a disease or contamination, more like a possession. A mental infection that rewrote perception, purpose, and identity. The rig wasn't just a trap, it was a transmitter. It had touched something ancient, and now it was broadcasting that madness. Whatever we had seen, whatever had taken the crew, wasn't finished. It was still here, still watching, and now it knew we were here, too.